So is Vladimir Putin trying to start a new Cold War? I'm joined now by Jonathan Sanders, the Associate Professor, Stony Brook University School of Journalism, and Philip Mudd, CNN counterterrorism analyst and former CIA counterterrorism official. Stephen Cohen, Professor Emeritus of Russian Studies at Princeton University and NYU, has written an article in The Nation about the ongoing conflict. I suggest you read it. It is very eye-opening. So, Philip, as Sarah just reported, U.S. intelligence shows that at any moment Russians are ready to transfer more powerful weapons into Ukraine, including tanks, armored vehicles, rocket launchers. In the face of world condemnation, Putin is escalating tensions. What is he up to?
I tell you, one of the things he's doing is thumbing his nose at us. When you're an intelligence professional, after 70 years of post-World War II intelligence collection against first the Soviets and now the Russians, collecting this type of intelligence information is not that difficult. Big weapons systems, when the United States has a lot of intelligence capability, collecting this information. You know, 10 days ago, we're speculating on what the Russians were doing with a missile system that shot down an airplane. Now the Russians are saying, forget about it. Game on. We're sending it stuff across the border, and we don't care whether you see it or not.
You know, Jonathan, Hillary Clinton told CNN's Fareed Zakaria today that Putin is the kind of man who will go as far as he can get away with. Is the world going to be sitting around, you know, slack-jawed while Putin takes over eastern Ukraine? What can stop him?
Well, Mr. Putin is Machiavellian. He's determined. He's a judoist kind of fighter. He takes energy from other people and uses it. But I don't think you're getting the full story here. Human Rights Watch, no group that particularly loves Putin because he's so repressive at home, had a piece today accusing the Ukrainian forces of using rockets, Grad rockets, to attack cities, saying it was a war crime. And it's that kind of action that's provoking Putin and the Kremlin, as much as they control the characters in Ukraine, and they don't totally control them. They've created monsters, and the monsters are doing some monstrous things, but they're backing them up. It's not just one-sided, and if you want to see this as Putin guys bad, Ukrainian guys good, you got it too simple. And when the Kremlin says we're smearing them, well, maybe we're smearing them by only telling part of the story.
Stephen, it sounds like you read your article.
Well, Jonathan's a historian. We've known each other a long time. And historians try to tell all sides of the story. In fact, there's an American adage. There are two sides to every story. And what's missing from this story, and it was the subject of my article, which appeared first 3 weeks ago, and I do believe some of these human rights organizations that Jonathan just mentioned were reacting to my accusation that we've turned a blind eye to what the Ukrainian government, that is our government, the government we support, has been doing to the civilian populations of cities in eastern Ukraine. Now, those are Ukrainian citizens, though they speak Russian. And here's what's interesting, Don. You just had a discussion with Fareed Zakaria. And Fareed said to you, you know, outside the United States, a lot of countries object to what Israel is doing, firing on civilian residences in Gaza. Nobody in the United States, not the American government, not the American media, is objecting to the hundreds, if not thousands, of civilian women and children being killed by the Ukrainian army. And by the way, there's a humanitarian catastrophe. I don't know if Jonathan knows the number, but there's at least 200,000 refugees on the move to avoid this war.
Yeah, Jonathan, you want to respond quickly because I want to place something.
Well, you know, Steve's right about the number of refugees, but we've been telling this story so simply as good guys and bad guys. There are lots of different parts of this. There's lots of repression that's going on back on the Russian side. But you had earlier on CNN the American ambassador to Kiev, and he was saying that Putin's pouring gasoline on the fire. The danger is in the emotionalism back here in the United States. There are people calling for us giving weapons to the Ukrainian side, which would be pouring more jet fuel on the fire. And you know who's going to die? Russians are going to die, and Ukrainians are going to die, and kids are going to die.
Okay. I want to play part of an interview with the former president of Georgia today. And I want to remind our viewers that Russia invaded Georgia back in 2008, still controls 20% of its territory. Here's what the former president said about Vladimir Putin.
I think he believes it that he has to take revenge for what he regards as the United States defeating Soviet Union and Russia in Cold War. And then he always said that he would undermine NATO and destroy NATO, and the surest way for it is to continue his aggressive actions towards the Baltic countries. So he has been lying all the way through, but he has never been lying about his main goals.
So do you think he can undermine NATO with these actions, Philip Mudd?
I think he can undermine NATO depending on what Washington does, what the Europeans do. The Europeans, I think, have been quite slow to respond. The problem is, if you look at the variety of security problems we have today, that is going from Afghanistan through the rise of ISIS in Iraq, now a NATO problem in Western Europe, with an American public that says we're not interested in intervention overseas anymore, it's hard to sit here and say, what are we going to do if we've got to put up or shut up, with Putin saying, forget about the shoot down of the aircraft, I'm in for a dime, in for a dollar. And I think that's what he's saying.
You know, Stephen, you said on this program earlier this week, and I've been thinking about it a lot, that we are dangerously close to war with Russia, given today's developments. Are we one step closer, you think?
We are deep in a new Cold War, and it's getting harder and harder to get out of it. The likelihood, particularly if new sanctions are applied, and it's very hard to remove sanctions, that this Cold War will now affect the next generation. How close are we to actual war? Here's the scenario. Any Russian leader must protect Eastern Ukraine, must protect it from this bombardment. If Putin sends weapons or aircraft to do it, NATO may enter Western Ukraine, either on the ground or in the air. That would be, Don, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and all bets would be off. This is the most serious crisis, international crisis, since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we're in a fog of war. We're getting misinformation from Moscow, from Kiev, from Washington. I don't know how Mr. Mudd, a professional intelligence officer, can make these sweeping assertions when no information has been released and not even the intelligence agencies are saying publicly, or even the State Department, what he's saying. I mean, we have to be careful and get our facts straight, or we're going to kill a lot of people based on false information.
Philip?
Look, I'm not saying there's not two sides of the story, and I'm not saying that we only represent what we view from the West as an incursion by the Russians. I suspect there's been a wide variety of attacks on civilians by the Ukrainians. All I'm saying is, if you think it's difficult to collect intelligence against Russian big military systems in eastern Ukraine, it ain't. I'm not defending what the Ukrainians are doing. I'm not defending what Europe or Washington is.
Do you know who shot down that airplane? Do you know who shot down that airplane?
No, I don't.
Thank you. Thank you. That's the point. That's the point. We're racing to war.
What is the point?
The point is that
I didn't say anything about war. What I said was from an intelligence perspective,
could I get 2 cents in here?
Military moves is simple.
Okay, go ahead, Jonathan.
Look, I think the point is the problem is exactly what Saakashvili said, although I never agree with him. The problem's NATO. The problem is NATO. The problem is that the presidents, the two, Baby Bush and Bill Clinton, betrayed the promise that James Baker and President Bush Sr. made to the Russians about not expanding NATO. If we try and step back from this crisis and think creatively and think, what can we do to stop this warlike, dangerous situation? I'm not sure I think it's as critical as Steve, but that's a degree of nuance. Maybe we need to think of a different scenario. The United States and the Soviet Union both occupied Austria. Austria is now part economically of Europe, but is not part of NATO. Maybe we need some kind of guarantee. That's the way Ukraine has to go. Okay. Is the United States going to go to war to defend Ukraine? I don't think so.
Okay, that's going to have to be the last word. And what a way to start our Friday night, with a heated debate on national television and international now. We're being simulcast around the world. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Jonathan Sanders, Philip Mudd, Stephen Cohen. Have a great weekend.